Nobody talks about the 3 days. Every year, billions of people celebrate Good Friday and Easter Sunday, the cross, the empty tomb, the resurrection. But the part in the middle, those 3 days when Jesus was gone, that part is almost never explained. And I think that's a problem, because what happened during those 3 days might be the most powerful part of the entire story. So today, we're going into that. We're going deep into what the Bible actually says, what early Christians believed, and what was written down in ancient texts that most people have never read. By the end of this video, you're going to see the death and resurrection of Jesus in a completely different way. Let me paint the picture for you. It's Friday afternoon in Jerusalem. Jesus has just died on the cross. His body is taken down before sunset because Jewish law said a body couldn't hang on the Sabbath. A man named Joseph of Arimathea, a rich member of the Jewish council, goes to Pontius Pilate and asks for the body. Pilate agrees. Joseph wraps the body in clean linen cloth, carries it to a brand new tomb he had cut out of rock, rolls a giant stone in front of the entrance, and leaves. That's it. That's the last thing anyone sees. Jesus is dead. His disciples are scattered. Peter denied him 3 times. Judas betrayed him. Most of the others ran away when the soldiers came. The women who followed Jesus are watching from a distance, completely devastated. The movement everyone thought was going to change the world had just collapsed in a single afternoon. And for 3 days, nothing. At least, nothing that anyone on earth could see. Here's the thing that most people miss when they read this story. They treat those 3 days as a kind of pause, like Jesus died on Friday and then on Sunday God hit the play button again. But that's not what the Bible is saying, not even close. The Bible describes those 3 days as some of the most active, most significant moments in the history of creation. Something was happening that no human eye could witness. Something was happening in a realm that most of us never think about. To understand it, you have to first understand something about the world that Jesus lived in and what people back then believed about death. The Jewish people in the 1st century didn't think about death the way we do today. They didn't picture heaven as a place with clouds and golden streets that you go to right when you die. That idea came much later. What they believed in was a place called Sheol. In Greek, it was called Hades. And it wasn't heaven or hell exactly. It was more like a holding place, a place where all the dead went to wait. Think of it like a massive underground room divided into 2 sections. On one side, there was a place of comfort for the righteous, people who had lived faithfully before God. The Bible sometimes calls this Abraham's bosom, or paradise. On the other side, there was a place of suffering for the wicked, and between them, a great gap that no one could cross. Every person who ever died went there. Abraham, Moses, David, all the prophets. Everyone who had faith in God, who had lived and died before Jesus, they were all there, waiting for something, waiting for someone. And on that Friday afternoon, when Jesus breathed his last breath on the cross, he went there too. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. In the book of 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 to 20, there's a sentence that most people read right past without realizing how massive it is. It says that Jesus, after being put to death in the body, was made alive in the spirit. And then it says, in that spirit, he went and preached to the spirits in prison. Spirits in prison. Read that again. Spirits in prison. Peter isn't being poetic here. He's describing a real event. Jesus didn't just die and then wait quietly in a tomb for 3 days. He went somewhere. He did something. He preached. And this idea, this doctrine that theologians call the descent into hell or the descent into Hades, is not some strange fringe belief. It's one of the oldest teachings in the entire Christian faith. It's in the Apostles' Creed, which is one of the oldest statements of Christian belief ever written, one that churches have been reciting for almost 2,000 years. The line goes, "He descended into hell. On the 3rd day he rose again from the dead." Most people who recite that line every Sunday have no idea what it means. They think descended into hell is just a dramatic way of saying he really truly died. But the early Christians weren't being dramatic. They were describing something they believed actually happened. Jesus went to the realm of the dead on purpose with a mission. So what was the mission? To understand that, you have to go back even further. You have to go back to the very beginning. When Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden, something broke. Not just their relationship with God, but something much bigger. The Bible says that through one man, sin entered the world, and through sin, death. Death spread to all people. Every human being who ever lived carried that sentence with them. Even the most faithful, most righteous people who ever walked the earth, they still died. They still went to Sheol. They still waited. For thousands of years, the righteous dead waited. Abraham waited. Jacob waited. Ruth waited. David waited. Isaiah waited. All of them had faith in God. All of them had lived for something bigger than themselves. But the price hadn't been paid yet. The door hadn't been opened yet. And then Jesus came. And he didn't just die. He died as a sacrifice that paid the full price for sin. Every sin, past, present, future. The punishment that the entire human race deserved was placed on him on that cross. And when he said, "It is finished," something was settled. Something that had been a debt for thousands of years was finally completely paid off. So when Jesus went to Hades, he wasn't going as a prisoner. He was going as a conqueror. He went to Abraham's side of that divided realm, to the place where the righteous had been waiting, and he preached to them. He announced the good news. The price has been paid. The door is open. You don't have to wait anymore. This is what Paul is talking about in Ephesians chapter 4 when he quotes a psalm and then explains it by saying that Jesus descended to the lower parts of the earth, and when he ascended, he led captives in his train. Captives, people who had been held in that waiting place. He brought them up with him. And this is what Matthew is describing when it says that after Jesus rose, the bodies of many holy people who had died came back to life and appeared to many people in Jerusalem. Matthew is describing the after effect of what Jesus did during those 3 days, a whole group of righteous dead being set free. Now let's talk about the other side of Hades, because Jesus didn't only preach to the righteous dead. Remember the passage in 1 Peter? He preached to spirits in prison. The scholars who have studied this carefully point to the context around that passage and argue that Peter is specifically talking about the spirits from the time of Noah, the generation that was judged in the flood. These were not people who simply hadn't heard about Jesus. They were people who had lived in complete, deliberate rebellion against God, people from one of the most corrupt periods in human history. So what was Jesus preaching to them? This is where different theologians disagree. Some say he was preaching the gospel to them, a second chance, an offer of salvation. Others say it was not an offer, but a proclamation of victory, a declaration that said, your rebellion didn't win. God's plan went forward anyway. The enemy lost. The price was paid. The kingdom is coming. There's something almost breathtaking about that image. The Son of God standing in the very place that was supposed to be the end of everything and announcing, it's over, I won. Not with arrogance, but with the absolute certainty of someone who has done what they came to do. Now, here's a question I want you to sit with for a second. Why did any of this matter? Why couldn't Jesus just die on the cross and that be enough? Why did he need to go to Hades? I think the answer has to do with what Jesus was actually defeating. If Jesus only died physically, then death still had a territory. Death still had a kingdom. The grave still had power over the souls of everyone who had ever lived and died. A physical resurrection would prove that Jesus defeated his own physical death, but it wouldn't necessarily mean that the entire domain of death had been broken. But by going into Hades itself, by going into the very kingdom of death and walking out of it, Jesus wasn't just escaping death, he was dismantling it from the inside. He was walking into the enemy's home territory and tearing the place apart. Revelation 1:18 has Jesus saying, I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I am alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. The keys. He holds the keys. That's not just a poetic phrase. In the ancient world, keys represented authority and ownership. Whoever held the keys controlled who came in and who went out. Jesus is saying, I went in there, I took the keys. Death doesn't get to decide anymore. I do. Let's come back to earth for a moment, because while all of this was happening in the unseen realm, something was also happening in Jerusalem. The disciples were hiding. They were scared, confused, and completely lost. Everything they had believed in for the past 3 years seemed to be over. Jesus had told them multiple times that he would rise on the third day. He had told them directly, but in the moment they couldn't process it. When you watch someone you love get arrested, beaten, and executed, it's very hard to hold on to hope. The chief priests and Pharisees, on the other hand, were taking no chances. They remembered that Jesus had said he would rise in 3 days. So on Saturday, the day after the crucifixion, they went to Pilate and asked him to post guards at the tomb and seal it. They were afraid the disciples would steal the body and fake a resurrection. Pilate agreed. He sent a squad of Roman soldiers to guard the tomb. They sealed the stone. Multiple trained soldiers stood watch through the night. These were professional military men, men who knew that falling asleep on duty meant death. And then Sunday came. The women who had followed Jesus went to the tomb early in the morning to finish preparing his body with spices because they hadn't had time before the Sabbath began. And as they were on the way, they were wondering how they were going to move the stone. They didn't have to. Matthew says there was a violent earthquake. An angel came down from heaven, rolled back the stone, and sat on it. The guards shook with fear and became like dead men, and the tomb was empty. Not just empty as in the body was gone. The burial cloths were still there, neatly folded. The cloth that had been around Jesus' head was folded and placed by itself, separate from the rest. That's not what grave robbers do. That's not what a panicked escape looks like. It was calm. It was deliberate. It was like someone had simply gotten up, taken care of his things, and walked out. Mary Magdalene was the first person Jesus appeared to after the resurrection. She was standing outside the tomb, crying. She didn't recognize him at first. She thought he was the gardener. And then he said her name, just her name, Mary, and she knew. Over the next 40 days, Jesus appeared to his disciples multiple times. He ate with them. He let Thomas put his fingers in the wounds on his hands and side. He cooked fish on the beach for them. He walked with 2 of them on a road for hours without them recognizing him, and explained everything in the scriptures about himself, and then broke bread with them and vanished. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a vision. He was real, physical, present. But he was also different. He could appear in a locked room. He could disappear. His body was somehow both the same and completely transformed. Paul, writing to the church in Corinth, says that Jesus appeared to over 500 people at one time, and that most of those people were still alive when Paul was writing, meaning people could go and ask them about it directly. That's the kind of claim you make if you know the evidence is there. So what does all of this mean for us today? I think it means that the death of Jesus was not a tragedy that God somehow turned into a victory. It was a victory the whole time, exactly as planned. Every part of it, the arrest, the trial, the cross, the tomb, the descent, the resurrection, every single piece of it was intentional. Jesus didn't stumble into death. He walked into it with his eyes wide open. He knew what was on the other side. He knew what needed to be done there, and he did it. The empty tomb isn't just proof that Jesus is alive. It's proof that death lost. It's proof that the kingdom that was supposed to have power over every human soul since Adam was broken open from the inside. And those 3 days that everyone skips over, those were the days when it happened. While his body lay in a stone tomb in Jerusalem, while his disciples hid behind locked doors, while the world looked like it was over, those were the days when the most important work was being done. There's something about that I find incredibly comforting, because there are moments in life that feel exactly like that Saturday, the day after the cross, the day before the resurrection, the moment when everything looks dead, when hope seems stupid, when all the evidence tells you that you were wrong to believe. Those are the days when, according to the Bible, God is most at work. Not every story ends on Friday, and Sunday is coming. If this video made you see the Bible in a new way, watch the next one. It goes even deeper.